Hello everyone, welcome to this edition of Menopause Conversations. I'm hugely excited to welcome my next guest, someone who I have been watching on LinkedIn for quite some time, and with fascination because he appears to be the voice of many conversations, particularly when it comes to mental health and wellbeing. I'd like you to give a very warm welcome to my guest, Lee Chambers. Good afternoon, Lee. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, it's really lovely to have you here. So let me tell you why we're having this conversation. Lee is one of the most aspirational people I've ever come across on LinkedIn because he captures my attention about many things, but particularly about this next subject, which is menopause. And so when I introduce you to Lee, I mean, he's got a fantastic rider after his name. He's the award-winning psychologist, he's a coach, he's an entrepreneur, and he takes immense pride in utilising his skills for the purpose of well-being and performance. He runs a company called Essentialise, wellbeing and coaching company. So tell us, what's with the menopause and you then? How come you're getting into the menopause?
Yeah, so it's a really big thing for me, Amantha, and it's like, we've discussed previously, but to give a bit of context, our company does a lot of work around wellbeing strategy for other companies. And for me, I started to realize that actually this is something that's highly under-addressed, both in the workplace and society at large. But more than ever, it's a guarantee for so many people on the planet. And it directly impacts more than half the planet and indirectly impacts every single individual. And yet it gets such a small slice of the pie when it comes to strategy, it gets such a small slice of the pie when it comes to attention. There's an awful lot out there for all these other, considerations that might impact you at some point in life. But for something that's guaranteed, there seems to be so little support. And in fact, it's causing so many challenges in the work that I see. Amazingly talented women with diverse skill sets that have climbed barriers and obstacles throughout their career to get to where they are suddenly finding themselves low on confidence, struggling to sleep, losing elements of the memory. And workplaces are just ending up putting them on performance reviews, even taking them to disciplinaries before they actually offer them any support. And that, for me, really hits me in my heart because I'm an ethical person who likes to see things logically. And more than ever, as I've dived into the gendered health debate over the past 5 years, it's become quite a passion of mine how inequitable things are in health and how, sadly, they're not being addressed quickly enough. And for me, it's a passion to create a more equitable society in terms of health and finding that actually as a male ally in that voice, I actually bring a different angle that's very rarely addressed. And that is both a privilege and a little bit of pressure. But I really feel passionate that it's something that needs to start to have some of that stigma eroded, discussion becoming more normalized, more men actually stepping in and making this a priority so that things can move at speed, and supporting the women who are continually putting this forward and pushing the agenda, because we're in a place now where we can actually start to make a difference. And yet that requires a whole human approach from business, from the government, and from individuals pushing the agenda forward so it gets to the point where it needs to get at, where gendered health isn't as inequitable as it currently is.
That's so powerful, and that's exactly it. That's exactly what it feels like. I've had calls all this week, and if I told you the word invisible, marginalised, passed over, ignored, those words, those adjectives feature weekly in conversations, as you said, which for women who have literally fought their way through trying to smash that glass ceiling, only to find that the next set of adjectives, vulnerable, anxious, insomnia, all of these things, and feeling like they're terrified to have a conversation because of the stigma. And so I absolutely agree with you. I don't think this is just down to the GPs and the medical professionals. I don't think it's just down to HR. I think if you are anyone in business and you have women around you, which, let's face it, that's going to be most of us,
Yep.
You've got a responsibility to take an interest. I came off a call this morning. My husband's been a fantastic role model for menopause. He's even reading a book for me, which has been written for men about menopause, because I think we do need to approach it slightly differently, don't we? So one of the things I wanted to explore with you is, do we give the same message to men that we give to women when it comes to learning about the menopause? I mean, do you have a take on that? What do you think men want?
Yeah, so I think personally, men are starting slightly behind women from an understanding perspective, because as much as you can conceptualize what it's like to be the other gender, men have very few hormonal journeys to reference from. They don't have anything cyclical in their lives. Obviously, a male's hormonal journey is one incredibly long one. And because we don't have anything that's cyclical, it's very different for men to really get their head around anything that I suppose revolves around female health. It's like men are never going to go for a smear test. Men are never going to have to worry about, the direct physical and psychological impacts of childbirth. And because there's a lot of things that men really don't have an experience of, are not able to really get it tangible. I think the messaging has to be slightly different, but I think that the messaging needs to be collective. It needs to be not a discussion for this is menopause for men and this is menopause for women. It needs to be a shared broadening of the horizon and experience, because ultimately, when I'm looking and thinking what I'd like the world to become, it's where everyone has the ability to look out for, to offer a level of support and be able to have a bit more empathy and compassion around something that's so prevalent. And when you're coming back to those adjectives, Amantha, around how these women feel, it also sits alongside society's massive expectations and women coming to a certain age and becoming invisible because of the age that they are. There are more hurdles that need to be brought into that menopause conversation to show and highlight and spotlight the increased inequities of a woman's journey. And it's multifaceted, and men need to come into the menopause discussion and collectively look at and use the menopause as an anchor to see the other areas where women are in a position where they have lesser privilege. And even to my kind of knowledge and perspective on it, part of learning about the menopause is also part of unpacking your male privilege. And that is, I think, the one kind of differential around that. How would you broach it? Men have to do a little bit of unpacking of that male privilege to be able to appreciate menopause more and be more receptive and aware to taking the action and steps to normalizing those conversations. But I do feel more than ever that while women today, over the past 5 years, have started to talk about it more and increase that awareness, it's actually, there's a level of responsibility in men to create an acceleration in that, because at the minute, we're probably causing a little bit of resistance by just not having that standard awareness that's really important to incite action.
I couldn't agree more. And something you just said there just made me think, definitely say this, that actually, the government strategy is now to talk about women's health in the terms of the life term. And that phrase is really, really important, because we do have a tendency to fixate on this word menopause, but we get very focused on that, when in fact, actually, what about the perimenopause bit? What about the postmenopause bit? Actually, let's go back even further and talk about primary ovarian insufficiency, which can happen in your teenage years. Yeah. Let's talk about infertility. Let's talk, does it go far enough to just have a menopause policy? I mean, have we narrowed this down too far? What about if we're going to really embrace this? Because actually, any woman who's in your organization could be somewhere in that life term and struggling and needing that assistance. Surely we should be actually broadening this to women's health rather than just menopause. I mean, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, so I kind of feel part of it is due to the way that you engage a corporation or an organization. The menopause is quite a strong anchor because of the guarantee. However, by broaching that subject and bringing that into awareness, it creates a space for the wider gendered health debate. Now, you get this thing, you'd sit down with a group of male leaders, and if you start throwing PCOS, uterine fibroids, ovarian cancer, and getting them to suddenly sit there and think, well, it doesn't affect me, I have no idea what that is. But a base level of understanding around, these conditions that men don't face, it's significant because men have such a very limited understanding in terms of what they actually have to go through and what they have to check. Like, I can be brutally honest on this, with you, and say that from a male perspective, to look after myself, what do I actually have to do? I have to check my balls. I have to become more aware of my prostate and my urinary patterns as I get older. And I need to find ways to express my emotions. And probably the biggest barrier for most men is the health system has, primarily been created by men. And therefore, we should be able to access it easily. However, some of the patriarchal stereotypes and this idea that we, are overly stoic means that a lot of men don't access the same services created. And one of the biggest challenges is just being and getting over yourself and going and getting yourself checked out if you've been in pain or there's something abnormal and it's been consistent for a while. That's all I have to do. I don't have to worry about anything hormonal, cyclical. I don't need to worry about a specific range of cancers that I'm not going to face. I don't need to worry about anything around infertility, anything pre-pregnancy, post-pregnancy, any changes through pregnancy. I don't have to worry about so many different things. And I honestly think that if you as a man ended up in a position where you spent a week in a woman's body, you would suddenly be so much more aware of yourself. You would. You'd be just hyper aware, and it just create an understanding of how different things can be, because men don't have that hormonal cycle. What men also don't have is those few days to a week where you are completely on it and everything just flows. We don't have that. Men are just like constant, like plateaued for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And it's a different experience. But more than anything, I just feel that when we take menopause, which is quite strong and quite powerful as an anchor at the moment, by bringing awareness around that, it allows all those gendered health conditions to be something that can be discussed and looked at, because what it does is it opens that door of awareness, it opens that door of education for the wider gendered health debate.
I agree. And I like the way that you said that, because that is one of my bugbears. It's like, no, it doesn't stop with menopause. Yeah. But if it gets our foot in the door and keeps the door open long enough, we're in, type thing. And that's so important. Can you just give me a little bit more detail when you talked about your privileged position as men? What for people hearing you say that, unpack that a little bit for us. What do you mean by that? You talked about everything's very constant for guys, but what do you mean about that? Because I've seen so many times in my career the eye rolling, she's going on about that again. She's not on form. She's forgotten this, forgotten that. What do you mean by the privilege? I don't want to make any assumptions. What do you mean about being the privilege of being a man?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the fact that we live in a society that's driven a level of individualism, which almost creates this. Well, if it doesn't affect me, then why should I bother? Why should I educate myself? And even within families and units, so many men have mother, wife, daughter, aunties, wider female family, female in their place of work. They could be bosses, colleagues, people who they manage. It's so important to have that kind of understanding, because it's easy to say you're empathetic, but it's actually more difficult to be aware of what other people might be going through. And that awareness, that is a place of privilege to sit there and not be aware, because you're looking at ultimately people's behaviours and interactions and judging them from a place of privilege, because you don't have to dig deeper. and have an awareness of why that might be the case. So from a male perspective, because we have so few reference points ourselves, even if you've got, a relatively heightened level of self-awareness, you still have to unpack that privilege to open yourself up to be able to understand that just because you don't go through it means that you actually need to step into it and start to understand what women do go through in that situation. And, because you're a man, it can make you quite laissez-faire and very blasé towards any kind of hormonal cycle, because you don't have to endure, face, have that challenge. And I suppose that kind of male privilege, it sits in so many different layers of society that you start to ask yourself, why have a lot of these conversations been suppressed for so long? And, when you start to unpack some elements of your privilege, what you also realize is you've probably missed the mark a few times yourself in the past.
Yes.
There are things you've probably not called out that you should have. There are times when you've seen the top level of behavior, but not considered what might have been fueling that. There are times when you judge people unfairly. And ultimately, there are times when you've missed the mark of where you are today. And unpacking that, you will feel a bit of shame. You will feel a little bit like, I should have done better. You might even feel a little bit frustrated with yourself. But that creates a space for you to then start to appreciate other people's experiences. And I think that, in the wider perspective of, the modern masculinity, it needs to be finding ways to express the whole range of emotions. And it also needs to find ways to start to understand things that don't directly affect men and how they then influence the way that the world works, so that some of the barriers and obstacles men can start to, dismantle, to start to help women scale them, and to actually help men scale all the barriers to becoming self-aware in the first place. Because it's easy to just stand there in a privilege and not have to climb them. And it's a little bit of effort, but it makes such a difference to the world that you see, because all of a sudden you start to see what it's actually like for women. And that opens your eyes from really, I suppose when it comes down to it, men can live in a world of black and white and can happily stand there and watch the world go by. Or you can step into that self-awareness, unpack your privilege. You then see a world of colour. It's amazing. It's also very scary if you've been in black and white for so long. But when you step into that world of colour, you then become aware of how your privilege is giving you so much, but also really gives you a passion to be able to open up that privilege for other people.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. That's like a manifesto right there, isn't it? And it goes in line. I mean, I put a post out about 6 weeks ago to set up a men only group, more as a social experiment than anything else, to see how that would be. And so many people looked at it. Do you know what? I've got 10 people. Now that's 10 more than we had when we started. But you know what the irony is this? All those people are in, good jobs. They're in positions of responsibility. Do you know they're all struggling? They're all struggling because they've got someone at home who's struggling. Can you imagine trying to get those 10 people together? It's one of the hardest things. I mean, I thought it was going to be hard getting you.
Yeah.
It's hard getting those guys because they're actually at home supporting their partners who are struggling. They're supporting families and children and doing a lot of the stuff that maybe they don't want people knowing they're having to do. Yeah. Quite frankly, I think there's a level of embarrassment. I think there's a level of shame, dare I say, that people don't want to reach out. They don't want to ask for help. I've had my husband is amazing. He's supported me since I was 36. It's a long time to be perimenopausal and to have a lot of the things that now are taken as commonplace. I mean, I remember being at the dentist saying, I think my teeth are falling out because my teeth started wobbling. And I'm just feeling like I was mad. I remember being in my doctor's surgery and having worried well on my notes. I think, I know, I think times are, can I say, I went back to my same doctors this week and they said, afraid it's not something that we know about. Can I just say a shout out? There are no menopause clinics in Devon or Cornwall. Shameful.
That's a nationwide problem.
It's scandalous. And the fact that my GP still says to me, it's not really anything I know about. And in hushed tones, he leant forward and he said, do you know anyone who might be able to help you? Right. So we're dealing with that, aren't we? And so therefore, you know, how would you I know I'm loading this all on your broad shoulders, but I think you can handle it. How do we get men to come for that support? You know, because men alone aren't going to expose that about themselves at work, are they? You know, necessarily they'll come to these things. They may sit on the periphery, they may sit on the edge, they're curious, they want to know more. But how do we really support men, would you say, who are supporting partners going through this stuff, or supporting teams going through this? How do we take the uncomfortableness out of it, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge because the topic around it, there's still a level of stigma there, and conversations haven't been normalized to a point where you will generally get men coming of their own volition without a defined reason to start to learn. I think one of the biggest things that we can do is firstly hearing another man speaking about it really creates an opportunity for other men to think, well, why would he, who looks relatively young, be openly speaking about this? I feel that's the best part of being able to share my thoughts around the subjects, is that it provokes conversations and almost has people thinking, well, if he's going to speak about it, then there must be something there to explore for me, to build my self-awareness around it. But why I kind of started to realize that this is quite deeply anchored into the workplace is that so often, and from the practitioners that I meet, people that we know, when they run sessions, it's generally a more female audience, but a few men suddenly creep in and sit down at the back and gradually become more and more engaged. And then they're the ones who actually stood up afterwards saying, this has been vital. I'm currently supporting this person and it all makes so much more sense now. And they almost become that ripple effect within the male communities they sit within. Now, are we going to get groups of men sat in the pub like the olden days chatting about the menopause? Probably not there yet,
No.
but every time a man firstly ignites that conversation, secondly starts to resonate that out, and thirdly it starts to create this, well, actually it's something that's going to impact us all. And when we start to actually realize that you can't hide from something that will indirectly impact you, but actually will empower you to support someone you love, you care about, you work with, you're connected to, you actually realize that you can do a lot more for other people by just starting to normalize that conversation and having a little bit of education and awareness. And if there's something that men, still like and desire, it's a little bit of power and knowledge about how to help other people. And you know what? That's still a little bit of a crazy patriarchal power grab sometimes, but it's using the systemic issues that we have sometimes to actually create change by tapping into some of the smaller, compelling elements that have created the systemic problems to actually drive the systemic change for the positive. So actually, it's about empowering men to support other people who are going through the menopause, who are affected directly or indirectly. And all of a sudden, when they think they're going to learn something, it actually becomes something that is a little bit more attractive and engaging. And it's just kind of helping them to understand that, well, this is something where you can make a significant difference. It might actually impact how you are managed and manage yourself. It might impact your home life. It might actually be that one time where you spot that your colleague who you spend a significant amount of time with, something's changed. And you can potentially be the one who spots that, because we don't always spot the symptoms within ourselves. And sometimes we actually then have to go through a long process clinically to even be believed, or to even, get to a point where we're actually treated in a way that's going to be effective for us. And because of that, as a man, you actually have the ability to start to ignite those conversations, to assist, to support, to enable things to be better. And you know what? Doesn't matter what kind of man you are. if you want to make the world a better place, you turn up, show up, and start to create that ripple effect. And that starts with a simple conversation and being open and honest, and actually just being hungry to learn, because you won't learn about it if you don't put yourself into those situations.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I wish my husband was here to hear you say that, because do you know what? He resonates all of that. And it's really interesting. He's become a bit of a beacon for friends, work colleagues. They know, they see me on here all the time. So it's like there's a permission element there, that they know that he's a part of the success story. I wouldn't be here without him. That is a fact. I just wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't have the confidence to do it, because actually at the worst time for me, I was anxious, I was insecure, I'd lost my confidence, I wasn't working, I was really joyous raising my daughter, but like, what's next type thing? I've got this other thing I'm dealing with, and it was really hard. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think it's like moths are drawn to the flame, aren't they?
Yeah.
When you see something in somebody else, I think it's a really powerful, really, really wonderful thing. And I think you're right. It's a bit like parenting. If you know that you're going to be having a child, you go and do your homework, don't you? Your partner will put a book in front of you or something, or you'll go and research it yourself. But you'll have an idea of what you're getting into, won't you?
Yeah.
And I think this is also the mindset that would be helpful for people to get on board with, which is, might not be happening to you or yours right now, but there's no harm in getting ready for it, because actually, okay, your partner might not be on the cusp of it, but someone in your team will be.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly empowering. And I think as humans, we've forgotten how wonderful the feeling of giving is to another person. I mean, I do this because I love the thought that someone will not need to suffer in the way that I had to suffer. If that changes just one person's life, brilliant. So I think if we step into it in that realm, we bring the human back into the workplace, don't we? We bring that compassionate side of ourselves, and that's so important. So tell me, what is it you hope for the future with all of this? I mean, let's pan forward in 5 years' time, right? And we're sat having a debrief about the last 5 years, and what do you hope will have happened?
Yeah, so I think there's probably 2 or 3 things that I feel that would be a nice movement towards it. So what I see in my network and on my journey is more and more people carrying the torch for menopause and the wider gendered health debate. And I also feel there's lots of little piles of kindling, lots of people who are they're a bit dry, but they are passionate and they're just waiting to be ignited. And people who are carrying the torch, there's still quite a lot of resistance to those people. It's still quite taboo to carry the torch for menopause. And some people will try and douse you. But ultimately, the ability to carry those torches and light those piles of kindling to ignite those other people who then become beacons within their communities, within their organizations, start to actually, create lots of little fires, which really start to burn and really start to shift the dial on creating awareness that's much wider, much brighter, because ultimately it's something that still has a bit of a negative aspect. There's actually so much to come from being able to support people through the process, because you allow them to not let the impact of the menopause, impact their brilliance. And the truth is that whether it's a business losing a senior female leader who, to get to that point will have climbed over and faced a lot more challenges than the male counterparts, and therefore be, a lot more competent and skilled at what they do. Let's be honest. That tends to be the case at the work I see. Instead of losing them and having to pay double to replace them, that's double the salary it can cost to replace a highly competent, highly skilled female senior leader. You actually support them. And in fact, what you actually do as a business is you think, how can we use our power as a business to actually shorten the waiting list, to actually get them the tests that they need, to actually help them to secure this and get to a point where they feel supported a lot quicker. And that kind of not having that situation where they go to the GP and they say, you're too young, sorry, come back in 5 years. But yeah, no, I'm going off. But what I want is really for the firelighters like us to be less likely to be dosed and have our torches put out, and be able to travel around, lighting that kindling, really igniting other people, a mix of both male and females, to start to champion this in a way that actually creates real change within the business landscape, continues to lobby and push forward the government, using that influence to push them towards starting to think about how they can create a level of education around it too, to really start to change the dynamic and to increase the conversations. Because in 5 years' time, we should actually be looking at menopause as something that is looked at fully when it comes to this well-being puzzle that we have to try and solve. And there'll be a lot of well-being challenges in the future, but it needs to be a significant part because it's guaranteed, and it needs to start to then form all the other gendered health challenges around that. So we actually start to look at well-being through a much more holistic scope, but actually have the structures and more people in place to be able to offer that support, to be more aware, for us to be able to talk about it and it not be taboo, and have that normalization across the male populace, to be that support, to actually speak about it themselves, and to go out there into the places where it's less likely to be engaging, and even start to engage those people who don't want to hear it now. They might well be receptive in 5 years.
Brilliant. that is it, isn't it, to a T? Because I spoke to a lady a couple of weeks ago who basically is in financial debt, you know, who's lost her house, lost a career. She does a part-time work in a garden centre and has no access to actually the medical care either. But those aren't unusual stories, are they, Lee? Those are stories a million times over. And when we think the word a million, you know, a million women will consider leaving their jobs. You know, they don't have financial security. They're not contributing to their pensions. They're not thriving. They're surviving. And that just isn't good enough. You know, it just isn't good enough. And I think when you talk about a beacon, you know, there's disparities globally in terms of how menopause is addressed. And I think actually, wouldn't it be great if UK led the charge with, you know, all singing, all dancing menopause provision, to improve that equality for all of us, and, you know, to really stand as a beacon to other countries, like, look what's possible, you know. So I think that's brilliant, and I do really resonate with all of that. So our conversation is drawing to a close, which is such a shame, because I could just talk to you forever. We must do another one maybe. So tell me, how can people be in touch with you, Lee? Because I'm sure people will be clambering to connect with you, to follow. You know, you're a fool if you don't, is what I'm going to say, because you get such gems and you speak so passionately about all the things that relate to you. So how can people be in touch with you?
Yeah, so the best ways to get in contact with me is through my website, which is leechambers.org. And from there, you can get across to my socials, to my blog, and find out more about my business as well. But in terms of social platforms, I'm most active on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with you there. And you can, you know, enjoy my content, and I'll enjoy yours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's how I found you. So I'm so glad I did. So Lee Chambers, thank you so much for giving us your time, and thank you for all that you do across many aspects of equality and diversity, well-being. We need more people like you. So if anyone is sitting on the fence, I hope that this conversation has encouraged you to step off of it and step in the direction where people are ready and waiting to help inform you and guide you and help you be a better champion for menopause. So thanks for your time, Lee.